The unexpected guest. It was a typical Saturday afternoon at the Johnson household. Sarah was busy in the kitchen, preparing lunch, while her husband, Mark, was fixing the garage door. Their 3-year-old daughter, Lily, was playing in the backyard, giggling as she chased butterflies. But then, the front door creaked open. Sarah turned around just in time to see Lily waddle in, her tiny arms wrapped around the neck of a massive, dirt-covered pit bull. Her heart nearly stopped. "Mark!" she screamed, dropping the spoon she was holding. Mark rushed in, his eyes widening at the sight. The dog was huge, muscular, and clearly a stray. Its fur was matted, and it had a few scars along its body. But what terrified them most was that it stood calmly in their living room, as if it had always belonged there. "Lily, step away," Mark instructed, trying to keep his voice steady. But to their astonishment, Lily giggled and hugged the dog tighter. "Doggy nice," she said with her innocent smile. The pit bull, instead of reacting aggressively, wagged its tail and licked Lily's cheek. It then sat down obediently, looking up at Mark and Sarah with the gentlest eyes they'd ever seen. Sarah and Mark exchanged nervous glances. They had always heard horror stories about stray dogs, especially pit bulls. But here was their daughter, sitting on the floor, patting the dog's head like it was an old friend. Taking a deep breath, Mark cautiously knelt down. "Hey, buddy," he said softly, extending his hand. The dog sniffed it before giving him a slow, friendly lick. Sarah grabbed her phone and quickly called animal control, but before they could come, she noticed something odd. The dog had a collar, but no tag. It wasn't just a stray. Someone had cared for it before. When the animal control officer arrived, he checked the dog for a microchip. Sure enough, it had an owner. The officer made a call, and within minutes, a tearful woman arrived. "Max," she cried, rushing toward the dog. The pit bull's tail wagged furiously as it ran into her arms. "I thought I'd lost you forever." She explained that Max had gone missing a week ago during a thunderstorm. She had searched everywhere, but he never came back. The Johnsons were stunned. This so-called dangerous dog had been nothing but gentle and loving. As the woman thanked them, Lily patted Max one last time. "Good doggy," she said with a smile. That night, as they tucked Lily into bed, Mark shook his head in amazement. "I think we all learned something today," he said. Sarah nodded. Never judge a book by its cover, or a dog by its breed. And with that, they fell asleep, knowing their little girl had the purest heart of all. That evening, as the golden sun dipped behind the trees, a familiar sound echoed down the quiet street, loud, happy barking. Sarah and Mark exchanged surprised glances before looking toward the driveway. There, sprinting at full speed, was Max. His muscular frame moved gracefully, his tail wagging so hard it seemed to shake his entire body. Behind him, his owner, a kind-looking woman named Jessica, walked with a warm smile on her face. Lily, who had been playing with her dolls on the porch, gasped with delight. She jumped up, her tiny feet pattering against the wooden floor as she ran toward the dog. "Doggy," she squealed. Max let out a joyful bark before slowing down just in time to avoid knocking her over. Instead, he gently pressed his nose into her hands, licking her fingers as she giggled uncontrollably. Sarah and Mark stood up, still taken aback. "Jessica?" Mark asked, watching as she approached. "Hey," Jessica said, giving Max a fond pat on the head. "I hope I'm not intruding. Max has been acting strange ever since we got home. He keeps whining at the door, scratching at the gate. Like he wants to be here." Sarah looked down at the massive dog, now rolling onto his back for belly rubs from Lily. She couldn't deny it. Max looked completely at home. Jessica sighed, her expression soft. "I think he's made a friend he can't forget." Lily beamed up at her parents. "Doggy stay." Mark hesitated, glancing at Sarah. They had never considered having a pet, especially a big dog like Max. But looking at their daughter's pure joy and the way Max fits so effortlessly into their home, something in their hearts shifted. Jessica knelt beside Lily. "How about this? Max can visit anytime. Maybe even have sleepovers if your mommy and daddy say yes." Lily clapped her hands excitedly. "Yes." Yes. Sarah chuckled, exchanging a knowing look with Mark. I think that sounds like a great idea. Max let out a happy bark, as if he understood. From that moment on, he wasn't just Jessica's dog. He was part of their family too. The evening air was crisp, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink as Lily giggled, running across the backyard with Max close behind. His tail wagged wildly, his paws thudding softly against the ground as he chased after the little girl. Jessica leaned against the porch railing, watching the scene with a warm smile. I think Max has officially chosen your family, she said with a chuckle. Sarah, standing beside her, laughed. It certainly feels that way. Mark walked out onto the porch, stretching after a long day. He's a good dog, he admitted, watching as Max gently nudged a ball toward Lily, waiting for her to throw it. Loyal, gentle, protective, as if on cue, Max suddenly stopped playing. His ears perked up, and his eyes locked onto the wooden fence at the far end of the yard. A low growl rumbled from his throat. Sarah stiffened. What is it? Lily, sensing the shift in energy, stopped giggling. She looked up at Max, her tiny hand resting on his back. Doggy, she asked in a small voice. Max didn't move. His body tensed, his focus unmoving. Then, a rustling sound came from beyond the fence. Mark narrowed his eyes. Probably just a raccoon, he said, though there was an edge of caution in his voice. Jessica frowned. Max doesn't react like that to small animals, she said. He's trained to sense danger. The rustling grew louder. Then silence. Max remained still, standing in front of Lily as if shielding her. A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. Something or someone was out there. The backyard fell into an eerie silence. Even the distant chirping of crickets seemed to pause. Max stood rigid, his muscles coiled like a spring, eyes locked onto the wooden fence. His growl deepened, low and steady, a warning. Lily, still gripping his fur, looked up at her parents with wide eyes. Doggy mad? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark took a slow step forward, his eyes scanning the darkening tree line beyond the fence. Probably just an animal, he murmured, though he didn't sound convinced. Jessica tightened her grip on Max's leash. He's never reacted like this before, she said quietly. Something's wrong. The bushes at the far end of the yard rustled again, this time more forcefully. Then, a shadow moved. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Mark, she whispered, her fingers gripping his arm. Mark didn't respond. Instead, he moved toward the fence, his posture tense. Max let out a sharp bark, the sudden sound slicing through the heavy silence. Later that night, the house was quiet, but Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the events of the evening replaying in her mind. Max's reaction hadn't been normal. He wasn't just barking at a random animal. He had sensed something. Beside her, Mark shifted, clearly awake as well. You're thinking about it too, he murmured. Sarah nodded. I don't think it was just a cat or a raccoon. Max was guarding Lily. He knew something was wrong. Mark exhaled, rubbing his face. Tomorrow, I'll check the yard, maybe install a motion sensor light. Before Sarah could respond, a noise echoed from outside. A faint thud. Her heart pounded. Mark sat up, straining to listen. Another thud. This time closer. Then a low, familiar growl. Max. Mark threw off the covers and rushed to the window, peering outside. Sarah followed, her breath hitching. In the dim glow of the porch light, Max stood by the back door, his body tense, his ears alert. His gaze was fixed on the fence, the same spot from earlier. Then, out of the darkness, a shadow moved. Sarah gasped. Mark. Without hesitation, Mark grabbed his phone and turned toward the hallway. I'm calling the police. Sarah clutched the windowsill, her pulse racing. Outside, Max let out a deep, thunderous bark, one that sent a clear message. Whoever, or whatever, was out there had just made a mistake. The tension in the air was unbearable as Mark dialed the police, his hands shaking slightly. Sarah stood at the window, her eyes never leaving Max, who was still growling at the fence. The shadow had disappeared, but Max's focus remained unwavering. The phone call was brief. The dispatcher assured him someone would be out soon to check the area. Mark hung up, but his worry didn't fade. He pulled on a jacket. "Stay here. I'll go check the yard." "No," Sarah said, her voice sharp. "Max is out there. If something's wrong, he's our first line of defense." Mark hesitated but nodded. They couldn't risk it. Together, they quietly made their way to the back door. Sarah grabbed a flashlight, and with one last look at Lily, who was still fast asleep in her room, they stepped outside. Max's growl had softened, but his alert posture didn't waver. He was no longer standing still. He was pacing in front of the fence, as if waiting for something. "Stay close, Max," Mark murmured. Max turned his head, his eyes locking with Mark's. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the backyard went completely silent. For a moment, everything felt still. Then, as if a weight had been lifted, Max wagged his tail. The air felt clearer. "Mark," Sarah said softly, her hand on his arm. "I think it's over." But before Mark could respond, they heard footsteps from beyond the fence. Slow, deliberate. And then a voice. "Is everything okay over there?" Both Sarah and Mark froze. A man, tall and wiry, appeared from the darkness. He wore a baseball cap, and his face was obscured by the shadows, but there was something unsettling in the way he carried himself. Too calm, too deliberate. Max's growl returned, sharper this time. The man froze, eyes flicking to the dog. "I'm just looking for my dog," the man said, his tone strange, almost rehearsed. "I think it got lost around here." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't right. "You're not getting near our fence," Mark said firmly. His body went rigid, a protective instinct kicking in. The man took a step forward, but Max was quicker. With a low, threatening bark, he moved to position himself between the man and the Johnsons. His posture was one of authority, a silent warning. The man hesitated, his eyes flicking nervously between Max and Mark. He took a step back. "I'll come back tomorrow," he muttered, before turning and disappearing into the night. Sarah didn't take her eyes off him until he was completely out of sight. "Who was that?" she whispered. Mark shook his head. "I don't know, but I don't like it." Max, sensing the danger had passed, let out a deep sigh and sat down, his tail wagging gently. The police arrived minutes later, but by then, the man was long gone. They took a brief report, but no one could find any sign of his presence. The next morning, the fence was inspected, but there was no damage. Everything seemed to have returned to normal. Yet, the unease lingered in the air. Max, however, had returned to his usual calm demeanor, as if he'd done exactly what he was meant to do. From that day on, the Johnsons never took their safety for granted. Max stayed by their side, protecting them like he always had. He wasn't just a dog, he was family. And in the quiet moments, when everything seemed peaceful, they knew that whatever had happened that night, Max had kept them safe, without question, without hesitation. The end.